We have lots to discuss here in today's video, including some offseason trade talk around teams like Edmonton and Vancouver. In the case of the Canucks, we're looking at an article suggesting that the Canucks really need to make a defining move here by this management group to define and kind of put their stamp on the team moving forward. Looking at some top six forward options, mostly number two center roles. A number of players that have been in the rumor mill suggested in this article, including guys like Mason McTavish, Alexis Lafreniere, Josh Norris, Kirby Dach, and a few others. We'll take a look at that article. I'll go through and give my thoughts on which ones are the most likely, what could a trade look like, and really what are their possibilities here. Plus, we also have some other signings today, including a signing in Montreal. We have an arbitration case coming up between the Winnipeg Jets and Dylan Samberg, and some other news around the league coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. As I mentioned, we have lots to discuss in today's video. We're going to start things off we got news today about another player retiring, and that's Peter Mueller, another former highly drafted player who unfortunately didn't quite have the lengthy, successful career in the NHL that he was kind of projected to have when he was drafted. He was taken 8th overall in 2006 by the then Arizona Coyotes, appeared in 297 games, put up 160 points. The production wasn't horrible for the games that he played, but didn't last a super long time, obviously, in the NHL, not quite making it to 300 games. Mueller, of course, ended up playing a long time over in Europe after he left the NHL as well, playing 11 years in a variety of European leagues, including in Austria, Czechia, Germany, and Switzerland. So long-time pro career when you put it all together, pretty successful, but unfortunately things didn't quite work out to be the star player at the NHL level that they had hoped he would be when he was drafted. Although, like I said, he was productive and did have some good years there. So certainly want to wish him the best in whatever comes next. Another signing as well in Montreal. They've come to terms and avoided arbitration with young defenseman Jaden Struble. So another Arb case gets taken off the board here. As I mentioned, once we get all this arbitration stuff sorted out a few weeks ago, we ended up having 11 players file for arbitration, plus we had the Sabres file for our team for elected arbitration with Byram. So there was potential for 12 cases to be heard. By the time we had all the cases have actual scheduled dates, they were down to 7, and now we're down to only a couple left. So most of these guys have avoided it. So Struble gets a 2-year deal, just over $1.4 million with the Montreal Canadiens. Pretty fair contract. He's likely going to have an opportunity to play third pair minutes with the Habs this coming season. Obviously, they've kept some young defensemen around. They've traded some others. Obviously, Mailloux has been moved. Harris was moved. Bring in Dobson, Struble. Still, like I said, the line's to likely be a third pair guy. So pretty decent fair contract in his case. The other big arbitration case that could be coming up is between the Winnipeg Jets and defenseman Dylan Samberg. Now, we're only a short time away, usually about 48 hours or so out from the case getting started. The team and the player both have to submit their numbers for what they're looking for. And I would keep in mind when I give you these numbers, they're going to seem like a major gap, and there is, but the numbers are submitted with strategic purposes in mind. So, and we got this information from Elliotte Friedman earlier today. So the Winnipeg Jets are looking for a 1-year deal around $2.5 million, and the Samberg camp is looking for $6 million. So yes, that's a massive gap. It's $3.5 million, but in realistic terms here, neither side really sees it that way, and there's not really a $3.5 million gap. But you got to remember, the team is trying to get the lowest number possible, so they're going to lowball, and the player's trying to get the most money possible, so they're going to highball. So the actual meeting point here, I hope they can avoid arbitration. As I said before, it's a nasty process, often impacts long-term relationships. So, the real number is probably somewhere in between. Maybe in that 4.5 range, right? It's probably somewhere in there is kind of the sweet spot where they can maybe agree. Now, according to some local reporters in Winnipeg, there does seem to be an appetite for both sides to want to do a long-term deal. So they're kind of running out of time to get one done. So we'll see. Now, in arbitration, you can either do 1 or 2 year contracts, but in this case, it has to be a 1-year deal because he's only 1 year away from being eligible for unrestricted free agency. So if this goes through, once the hearing starts, negotiations stop, and it'll be a 1-year deal with whatever gets awarded. So that's not great for Winnipeg. They'd be walking him right to free agency. They go through this nasty process. Like I said, there's always a potential impact on the relationship long term. I really hope in the next day or two before this gets started that they can come to terms on a longer term deal. I think they really view Samberg as somebody who's a big piece of that blue line moving forward. So, get something done on a maybe 5-6 year deal. But yeah, that's where things are at, and we'll have to wait and see. Of course, the 30th is when that is scheduled for in the afternoon. So we'll see where things go. Now we also got another player that was rumored to be coming back to the NHL was former Anaheim Duck draft pick Max Comtois. Comtois had played last year in the KHL and had a pretty decent season. There was some speculation leading into the beginning of free agency. So ahead of July 1, I think this information came up probably second half of June, that Comtois was seriously looking at a return to the NHL, and there was supposedly some interest, but we obviously didn't know exactly, where things were at. And July 1 came and went, and of course we never heard anything about him signing anywhere. So at this point, he's elected to re-sign for another year in the KHL, and will remain with the Dynamo team there. So but he had a really good year last year. He seems to be suited well for that league. So I suspect, he could have another good season. Maybe after 2 good years in a row, he'll stand a better chance of getting what he wants. I suspect there were some offers. Maybe they were two-way offers, or maybe the amount that they were offering him was probably closer to league minimum. I'm not sure what he's getting paid in the KHL, but obviously he thought it was financially more beneficial to stay over there, and we'll see what happens. We also got word as well that Ted Nolan, of course, former NHL head coach, is being entered into the Canadian Sports Hall of Fame in the builder category. Of course, Nolan himself was a player. He's coached Latvia and Poland's national teams. Of course, even though he's Canadian, that's not unusual. A lot of the other European countries have certainly sought out North American people to be their coaches and try to draw off their levels of experience with strong Canadian American programs. He obviously had a great coaching run in junior time in the NHL. Was coach of the year with the Buffalo Sabres. I know that things ended there, kind of in unique circumstances, whatnot. But Nolan's had a pretty good career in hockey, and for him to be getting acknowledged to be entered into the Canadian Sports Hall of Fame is a huge honor. So I just want to acknowledge that big feat. The Colorado Avalanche are rumored to be adding a third jersey for the upcoming season, and it looks like it's going to be the blue Quebec Nordiques jersey. I'll show you a picture here, just remind you. Look at old Joel Sakic there. Beautiful jersey, in my opinion. I always liked the Nordiques colors in the Nordiques jerseys back in the day when they were obviously a franchise, and I'd still love to see them return someday. It seems like the odds are greatly against that happening for a variety of reasons, between economics, where things have changed in the league. But of course, we know they moved to Colorado, have had great success there. We've seen the Nordiques apparel pop up in the Avalanche with the history belonging to that franchise and being honored through different third jerseys in the past. So just like the Hurricanes use the old Whalers gear from time to time as well. It's nice to see that stuff brought back. It was some great stuff, and nice to see the history being honored there. So we'll see if that comes true. If it does, I suspect that will be probably a big seller for the Avalanche, but that could be their third jersey for the upcoming year. Now, in some Oilers speculation, more updates from Bob Stauffer and Oilers Now. He suspects by the end of August, he said by August 28th, that he could see a scenario where the Oilers have a variety of contract extensions and maybe even a move within the roster. So essentially, we've talked before from some of the stuff that he's said on his other recent shows. We know that obviously Connor McDavid is the big one. Clearly, I believe Leon Draisaitl is getting married here in early August, and once that's all said and done, the belief is that that's when they're going to really focus in on and get the McDavid contract hopefully hammered out. So he feels by the end of August we could see a McDavid extension. We talked before about Wallman and Ekholm on the blue line being guys that they really want to extend as well, try to get those hammered out. Now he's also mentioning Vasily Podkolzin, of course, who had come over from Vancouver and was a nice fit. He's really found a role there with Edmonton. So they'd like to keep him around as well. They can extend him out on a hopefully team-friendly extension. That could be maybe 4 Oiler extensions that we maybe see from the player side of things before we get into training camp. And then on top of that, he feels there's a pretty good chance that we'll see an extension for head coach Chris Knobloch as well. He's done a phenomenal job, obviously coming in and take the team to back-to-back Stanley Cup finals. I mean, even though they didn't win the cup, you can't really do much more than what they did without winning it, right? Now, the other player he mentions that would be eligible for an extension, but it kind of says that maybe they have to make a tough decision on is defenseman Brett Kulak. Doesn't mean that he's going to be traded, but it sounds like that might be a tougher call and that they might not jump to extend him. Obviously, they have to look at projections long term, and they're going to have to figure out a way, in my opinion, as I've said here in some recent videos, that they need to add some youth to this blue line. Obviously, Bouchard's not super old. He's still kind of hitting that prime mid-20s range. But then you've got Ekholm, is into his 30s now. Kulak's a little bit older. Wallman again not old either. But you get Stetcher, Nurse. They don't have an old blue line by any means, but there's nothing really exciting coming up to add a youthful injection into this Oilers blue line through their own system here that's ready, or at least going to be ready in the short term. That's why they were rumored to be maybe looking at some options with some other younger D around the league that might be available, like Olen Zellweger is one of the names we had mentioned from the Ducks that could be possibly moved. So again, Kulak's one of those players that not a given he gets extended. He could be a piece that moves. Or they also could go into the season and just kind of let it ride for right now, see how it goes, see how he plays, see how the team does, and then kind of make a decision later on what his future is. But yeah, not a given that he gets extended though. Now the other bigger article I want to look at, which would be the bigger talking points here today, Canucks article from the Daily Hive, looking in, and I do have a lot of thoughts on this article, and I do agree with the kind of the sentiment here that the Patrick Allvin, Jim Rutherford team here, management group within the Canucks, they really do need another big move to kind of define this era of Canucks hockey, comparable to when JT Mueller was brought in. For example, that Mueller trade had a lot of positive value early on, especially. Now I know things changed and how things ended. But essentially, in the beginning, that type of trade to bring in that kind of, powerful player that can have a big impact in your top six and really elevate things from an offensive perspective, it served its purpose, and they really did get good value out of that. They ended up signing them to a pretty good long-term extension. Unfortunately, things happened, otherwise that kind of wrecked things, which caused him to be traded. But that's left a glaring hole in their lineup. And ultimately, they're not as strong and deep down the middle as they'd like to be. And to me, if that's by far the biggest glaring need for the Vancouver Canucks. We've seen them make some re-signings this offseason with bringing back Besser. Garland gets extended. They brought in Jake DeBrusk last year, who did all right. So, they are okay on the wings. But down the middle, they really need that number 2 center, which is a common theme around the league. There's a bunch of teams looking. Now, this article mentions 9 different guys they could target. I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about all 9. I've kind of narrowed down to 2 or 3 guys that I think make the most sense and they'd actually might even have a legitimate shot at getting. So I'll run through the 9, and we're going to start with the ones that I don't think really have a chance. Number 1 on the list was Mason McTavish out of Anaheim. Again, I don't think that the odds of them getting McTavish are good. For one, I think Anaheim's preference is to keep and sign McTavish. We've heard the rumors around him about the frustration, utilization, all that stuff. And I think to some degree there is some truth to that. But again, even if the player is feeling some of that and, ultimately he does have a say in his future too, I don't think the team is going to be actively looking to move him. I think, Verbeek made it pretty clear he sees Carlson McTavish as his big number 2, 1-2 centerman down the middle. So, he would be very expensive. He's young, number 3 overall pick just not long ago. And I don't think the Ducks really want to move him. And I think if they were in a situation where the Ducks decided that based on the negotiations with his contract and everything that they had to do it, I think there's other teams that could get a much better package than what they could do. Some other names that were mentioned that I just don't think are either impactful enough or just don't seem to be the best options for me. You get mentions Los Angeles Kings, Alex Laferriere. Again, a player who's pretty good, could be impactful to some degree, but I don't think that's what they need. I really don't. I think they need a really legit number 2 center. Ideally, somebody who can even push the number 1 center, right? Mentions Philadelphia Flyers looking at either Owen Tippett or Tyson Forster. Again, I don't think those are players that the Flyers really wanted to move, and I'm not sure that it's the right fit and the right guys that they're looking for. Mentions Dmitry Voronkov of the Blue Jackets. Good player. I think is a player that's going to continue to get better. Again, not sure that that's really the player they need. Also mentions the Ottawa Senators, where they have a lot of centermen. It mentions between Cousins, Pinto, and Gregg, targeting one of them. I don't think Ottawa has any intentions of trading any of them for starters, and I don't really think that they would have anything that Ottawa would really want in return. The only way Ottawa would consider that, well, for one, they just got Cousins, and I think they like him in that number 2 spot with Batherson in that second line. So don't see that happening. Ridley Gregg is, he's the natural center, but been playing a lot on the wing because of the depth. He could be a top 6 winger this year. He could be the third line winger with Pinto still, depending on how things work out with Zetterlund. Pinto is a really good number 3, and I think ideally long-term might be a 2, which is why some teams think that, between long-term, between Cousins and Pinto, maybe they both aren't there for a super long time. I don't know. But with Pinto's progression the last few years, he's a really good 3, so we'll see. I don't see a scenario where they really want to move anything. They have really good depth. They don't really have a reason to deplete that depth, and I don't think that the Canucks really have what they would want if they were to make that move. So I don't think any of those guys are really reasonable. Some names mentioned in this article I think could be reasonable. One, it mentions the Montreal Canadiens either targeting Alex Newhook or Kirby Dach. Now, Newhook does have some ties to the area, playing the BCHL way back, but technically from Newfoundland, so not really anything super strong ties there to the area. Of course, Kirby Dach, Western Canadian as well. So, geographically, there might be some ties there. I don't think that really matters too much. Newhook, to me, is not really a number 2. I think he has potential to be a really good 3. And, in a pinch during an injury situation or something, can maybe be a 2 on a short-term basis. He hasn't proven enough to me to be a 2. So I don't see that kind of move being a era-defining, really big trade to really say, okay, we're really serious here. We're going all in. That's not the move. Now, Doc would have had that, maybe has that potential. But again, I think Doc's going to be given that opportunity in Montreal this year. And he's had a lot of injuries. There's the risk with that. I haven't really heard a whole lot about his rehab and where things are at. I suspect things are good, but we don't know. Again, I think he's an interesting name. If things were not working out for him as the number 2 center in Montreal, I can see them considering a trade. However, they might try to swap for another centerman. I don't know, maybe it would Doc for Hedl or something like that. I'm not sure if that's something either team would want to do, but that's probably the kind of trade you're looking at. Both guys have injury history. Maybe that would be a swap. Is it an upgrade? I'm not so sure, right? That's a tough call. Of course, it mentions Alexis Lafreniere. Now, of course, Lafreniere has ties to Vancouver through their AGM, Emily Castonguay, who's his former agent. So she represented Lafreniere before she became the assistant general manager to the Vancouver Canucks. So there is ties there. He obviously has people on the inside that would support him, but he is not a centerman. He's a winger. He has potential to be a really good winger. We know the Rangers, he just signed a big contract and then had a down season, so that comes with some risk as well. This is not the first time. This is probably the numerous times that he's been linked to teams like Vancouver or Montreal if the Rangers ever decide to move the former first overall pick. But again, is he that player they need? I don't know. It's a tough call, to be completely honest. I'm not so sure. It also mentions Josh Norris, who was just traded to Buffalo recently for Dylan Cousins, but not big Senators Sabres deal near the NHL trade deadline this past season. Now, to me, it might be the most likely scenario. Now, before Josh Norris was traded from Ottawa to Buffalo, there was a lot of trade conversations between Ottawa and Vancouver regarding Norris. Vancouver had a lot of interest in this player during his time with the Senators, and there was a lot of talk around league circles that the Senators were looking for a bit of a shakeup and upgrade in the forward group. And before the Norris trade happened, there was some talk that his name had been out there, mainly because teams were asking. And of all the players that Ottawa had signed longer term, he seemed to be the one that they might be willing to move if the right deal comes along. Well, they found that deal with Cousins and the Sabres, not with the Canucks. Now, I'm not convinced, and I guess we'll have to wait and see if nothing happens here, how the season starts. I'm just not really convinced that Josh Norris is really thrilled to go to Buffalo. I don't know that he's going to ask for a trade. I'm not predicting that. I do not know Josh Norris personally. I just don't see him being happy there. We do know he's best friends and great buddies with Quinn Hughes. We know the Canucks are all about making Quinn Hughes happy, so he stays long term. And we know that there was prior interest there. So when Josh Norris is healthy, he can be a 30-goal guy, good in the power play, good two-way player, really developed his stronger two-way, 200-foot game here in the last year or two as well. So he, to me, probably makes the most sense for Vancouver. Now, what could they offer to Buffalo to make that trade happen? That's the tricky part here. We know the Sabres have been in a never-ending rebuild, 14 years without playoffs. They're not going to want to make themselves worse. The Sabres, really in the grand scheme of things, have traded Peterka this offseason, which theoretically does weaken them in that group. They get Doan and Kesselring. We'll see. I mean, I can see those players being useful for the Sabres. I'm just not convinced they're better right away, right? The decor might be a little bit more balanced, and I know they really like Kesselring and all that, and that's all good. But from a goals for perspective, I think they're going to take a step back before they take a step forward. That's challenging. Norris didn't have a great run with Buffalo after getting acquired from Ottawa. He only played a few games, and then he was sitting out, and they were saying that it was a flare-up of an injury he had in Ottawa, which I believe was a groin issue. Ended up missing pretty much the rest of the year. He didn't play a ton. It seemed like they were going to put him with Thompson, play him at center and put Tage Thompson on the wing, is what they kind of had envisioned there. I don't know. I'm just not really sure. I think out of all the guys mentioned, they would have the best chance. Now, I know Buffalo obviously really like Josh Norris. We've seen the behind-the-scenes video of Adams getting the trade done with the Senators for Norris. He was super pumped about it. So, obviously, I'm not sure what they would have to do. But that, to me, is the player on this list that makes the most sense, that could have the biggest impact. But some of these other guys could be more impactful. I just don't think it's reasonable that they could get them. But I know Norris, I think, would be happy to play with his buddy Quinn. And like I said, I know that's a big part of the Canucks' long-term strategy here, too, is make the captain happy. So he wants to sign a contract extension when he's eligible here in the not-too-distant future. But let me know. I'll link this article in the pinned comment. Let me know what you think the Canucks should do. Do these players, like, out of these players, who makes the most sense? What's the most, it not only makes the most sense, but who's the most reasonable one that you think they could actually get? And that's going to be the hard part. A lot of these guys are going to be tricky to line up trades for. And like I said, I think either Doc, Lafreniere, or Norris are the ones that are most likely to possibly even be available. And the trades themselves will be tricky to do. They'll be pricey, but I'm not sure if they can pull it off, but I think they have the best chance with those guys. Let me know what you think in the comments. We'll discuss further. If you're new to the channel, make sure you subscribe and stick around. We'll keep you up to date with all the news, rumors, and analysis of all 32 NHL teams. Thanks for watching. I'll catch you next time.